So I'm struggling with how to exactly say this because I'm walking a thin line. I think it's not that I think that these institutions are like worth saving. It's that I'm being a realist about it. The world that we live in is the world that we live in. The powerful nations are the powerful nations, and the powerful people are the powerful people. And powerful news organizations have an access that people like myself will never have. And so I think it's important to have the ability to have some sense of the process being implemented by the powerful. And that's what I think is the most valuable part of the New York Times in understanding the nature of power.
Is it worth?
It's a clumsy answer, but that's my...
No. But what about social media? That's the other question. But then is it worth making compromises to, if you understand how the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal operate, there are a lot of people who will say, okay, well, then I'll self-censor to get myself in, to give at least a somewhat more nuanced message than is standard. But then it becomes
I don't like when
difficult.
people do that. I think it's really, I don't think there's ever a justification for checking your conscience at the door. I think a lot of people trick themselves or fool themselves into believing that trade-off is worth it. And I think it very seldom is. I'll give you one example. There was, when I was investigating Blackwater, there were a couple of times when I was given really sensitive information about the company that I knew would rock the powerful inside that company, but not if I printed it in the Nation. And I didn't go to the New York Times and say, hey, I'll write a watered down version of my investigations of Blackwater so that I can get this nugget into it. Instead, I went to journalists that I respected at the New York Times, and I made deals with them for that. I gave them my reporting and asked for no credit, but I did insist on phrasing, how they were going to phrase it in the article. And it was a really interesting negotiation I had with a couple of very famous New York Times journalists who were covering Blackwater. And in the end, I was able to achieve what I tried to do. And I think it was smart. I think I was able to get some factual information printed in the New York Times that if it first appeared in the Nation wouldn't have been taken seriously. And it did result in congressional inquiry. So I think it's a dance with the devil in some ways, but no, I don't think that anyone should ever say, well, I'm going to say this a different way because I hope that the New York Times will allow me to step on the stage for a few minutes to make one of my 10 points. I think that's a really dubious morality at play and should be avoided. My 2 cents.
Jeremy, that's yeah. Go ahead.
Just wanted to follow up, because I know you're gonna ask the other one, but just one last follow up on this. Do you not think this is a generational issue? So that it's
definitely a generational issue.
Yeah, younger people are not necessarily going to be. My daughters are not reading the New York Times. They're looking at the, all the social media to get those.
I went on something called Twitch TV the other day. I was on with this guy. He's kind of a hilarious guy, Hassan Piker. Hassan the Hun, and I ended up being on with him for 2 hours. And it was so remarkable how many messages I got from like really young people that are on these feeds all the time. But what's interesting, and I think you guys are professors, teachers, and anyone who's interacting with younger people today, and also Rashid Khalidi told me this the other day when I was talking to him, that he sees it among his students that their minds are not contaminated by the kind of monopolistic media culture that everyone on this call right now, we all grew up under it, where you had your NPR if you were in the US, you had local television news, you had maybe your local paper. And then there were the New York Times, maybe the Washington Post, but like you had a small media environment to choose from. And so many young people, look at the paradigm that has been shattered on Israel-Palestine right now. Look at how many young people know something more than just a few things about what the Nakba was. How many people are pushing back against this attempt to deploy allegations of anti-Semitism against anyone who criticizes Israeli policy? There are some monumental shifts taking place that I think people who are around college-age students right now are probably seeing more than the rest of the broader public, that because of social media, because of peer-to-peer education that's happening, you have an environment where great information can spread. Great history can be learned, absorbed, taught on these platforms, but also bad information can be spread. There isn't any, no one is sort of at the helm of these things. And it's the Wild West in so many ways. But I think it's a net good that the grip on dissemination of information, the monopolistic grip, has been shattered. The challenge now, though, is to find ways to ensure that people are absorbing accurate information, or are not being misled down a dangerous line. I don't think that the answer is any government getting involved with this. I'm talking about us as individuals. You guys as teachers, me as myself as a journalist. I think part of it is finding what is great about how so many young people are producing and absorbing media, and trying to share ways that we've learned to be responsible or ethical. Getting your facts right, that has to be a priority of anyone who considers themselves a responsible citizen, that pursuit of knowledge. But no, on net, I think it's really great. And I think a lot of dangerous rules about the dialogue on Israel-Palestine are just getting obliterated because young people aren't going to be bullied by it. And it's not just young people, it's all of us, I think, are realizing, unfortunately, and tragically, it has taken more than 25,000 Palestinian dead, and we should never forget that they should be at the center of all these discussions, that the people of Gaza are in a killing cage right now, being massacred with American weapons by a genocidal regime, headed by a man whose political career was in tatters until this war began. But the paradigms are being shattered, the rules are being rewritten, and the resilience that has been forced upon the Palestinian people is educating all of us and educating the world. And I think of Rafid al-Arir and how he, before he was assassinated by Israel, spent so much of his time online, patiently trying to educate people, not just doing it in the classroom, where he was a much respected and at times feared teacher, according to his students, but also spending endless hours on social media, just trying to educate all of us about what conditions were like in Gaza. And I think his legacy lives through the young people who can now tell their parents what the Nakba was.